Let's get that. Here we go. Miniature robots.
Also so wild that we have, robots without, genders. And it's like, oh no, we have the male one and the female one, and they fall in love. Like wild,
There's always a big glare right there, so if any of you happen to notice any attendees joining, then please just wave your hands so that I can scooch over and
Will do. Okay, so I believe we have quorum, so we can begin. Heather, if you want to start us off with meeting protocols.
sorry, my computer's being a little glitchy.
It fails.
And let's. Great, welcome everybody. City has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, board and commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement process, please visit that website. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony should be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their full name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Because we do not have registration for open and public comment tonight, you can indicate you would like to participate by using the raise hand function. The raise hand button is in the participant box, which can be found in the menu by hovering over the top or the bottom of your screen, and then click on the participant icon. When the box opens, you will see the raise hand button at the bottom. By clicking that button, you can indicate you would like to participate in open or public comment. If you've joined us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand.
Thank you. Before that, I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Right? Just a quick raise of hand vote. All in favor? All right. And then seeing no public participants at the moment, I think we can move past that. And on to the extended Jonathan Cohen presentation.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Oh, great.
Yeah. No one wants that less than me to have all the agenda items with your name next to it. So I will apologize in advance. I'll try to make this as painless as possible. For the record, Jonathan Cohen, Director of the Climate Initiatives Department. It's great to be with you. So we have a handful of items tonight, and many of them are kind of in that update category. So this will give you an opportunity to eat your dinners. But I do want to just emphasize that as we go through some of these updates, if you have specific questions, particularly on the first, I talked about the updated climate action plan. We'd love to just get some early feedback from the board on the direction that we're heading. Some of the other items, again, are purely informational items that I just had said I would like to bring back to the board just for your awareness, but I'll kind of jump in at that point. And if you really need a break from my voice, we'll just call a recess. We'll all go outside. Okay. So I'll jump in. And talk first about the update to our climate action plan and give you a little bit of background. But before I do that, I just want to make sure you're aware that this is not the one and done show with the board. I anticipate we're going to be coming back to you on many occasions to give you a sense of where we're headed with the update to the plan. And a little bit of the time frame right up front. We're intending to try to get something in front of council Q4 this year with a wrap up by Q1 of 2025. And so building in an engagement plan to try to do that is obviously a lift, but that's our intention. So I want to talk a little bit about what it is, what's in scope, what's not in scope, and why we're doing this now. So I'll just give you a sense that the original, I'm going way back now, the original climate action plan was passed back in 2006. It was our first climate action plan and built upon a couple of other kind of frameworks for climate work that really were initiated back in 2001 and 2 when Boulder became one of the first cities to ratify the Mayor's Climate Protection Protocol that was started by Mayor Nichols out of Seattle. So at that time, the US was not ratifying the Kyoto Protocol, and so cities, you might recall, took it upon themselves to say, if the US isn't going to do it, if they're not going to ratify these protocols, then we as cities should take that upon ourselves. And so Boulder was one of a handful of very early signatories to do that. Fast forward to 2006, we over a period of about 2 years, developed a pretty rigorous public engagement plan to go out and talk about what a climate action plan should contain, what does it actually mean in terms of being aspirational, and what are the real targets and things that we should be doing to address climate. The majority of the strategies in the original CAP were oriented towards the Kyoto target, which was to reduce emissions 7% below 1990 levels by the end of 2012. You don't need to know that math, but that was really what Kyoto was all about. So looking at emissions levels in 1990, reducing them 7% below that level by the end of 2012. So when council adopted that first climate action plan, that was when we coupled it with the funding mechanism, which was our climate action plan or carbon tax. That passed just after, and that allowed us to really create that funding mechanism to develop and fund the strategies in the original climate action plan. So just kind of tracking forward a little bit, in around 2010, we did a major update to the CAP. Most of that was, so let's use CAP as climate action plan, that's an acronym. In 2010, we were really starting to understand the role that voluntary actions were playing versus regulatory and policy level actions, what we needed to do as a city, as a governmental body to achieve the actions, what type of private sector investment was going to be necessary to achieve our targets or achieve Kyoto. And so we did a pretty big overhaul in 2010, and mostly around our programming, not necessarily around the CAP. So then Kyoto came and went. We made pretty significant progress, but what we learned is at that time, 2010 to 2012, the biggest source of emissions, of course, was electricity generation. And what we found is the grid intensity of our power was so volatile based on Xcel. So as Xcel brought Comanche 3, which is their largest coal plant in the state's history, they brought Comanche 3 on in 2010. We saw the grid intensity of our power go through the roof. So that meant that our emissions, the emissions from our energy sources went way up. And so that's predominantly what led to our municipalization effort. So 2012, we realized that Kyoto was not going to, we weren't going to achieve the Kyoto target, but we had made progress. But the CAP, the tax, the carbon tax also expired in 2012 because it was tied to Kyoto. So that's when we went back to voters with a pretty hefty analysis. We worked with a couple of firms, Rocky Mountain Institute and another consulting firm called Brendel. And they did two things for us at that time. They did a look back to say, how have the CAP tax dollars been used? Have they been effective in achieving emission reductions? And then a look forward to say, if that tax is renewed moving forward, what kind of strategies should be implemented? Should we just do more of what we've been doing? Should we broaden it? We did a whole bunch of community engagement to understand how we should be using those funds. So 2012 was a big time, I think, as we were thinking about our policy work and our climate action plan. I'm giving you the whole history now. I should have just done a slide. So then moving forward to about 2015, we had another vote on the cap tax. And then in 2017, we released the next round of our document, which was our not a climate action plan, but it's what we call our climate commitment. That actually was a hard copy document that really started to explore these areas of resilience. We were now post 2013 flood. We had a really good understanding of how resilience needs to show up in our climate work. We were really starting to explore and understand where we were headed on energy, the roles that the city and government can play in terms of regulating emissions, moving beyond just energy efficiency, really starting to think about transportation linkages, really starting to think about nature-based solutions. And so not just, let's just do more and more of the same, let's start to broaden and really, really think about what's been effective in reducing emissions and really thinking about the conversation you hear from me all the time, which is values. How is our work making lives better? Is it improving health and safety, economic productivity in our community? So not just metric tons of carbon, but how are we actually contributing to bettering our environment locally? So our climate commitment was the first document that really took a pretty hard look at what had been working, what wasn't working, and how we updated that. So 2020 was a really important time also. So we did a couple of things. Obviously, it was the ballot measure in which we moved away from municipalization to the partnership with Xcel Energy. And that was, I think, very reflective of all the work that we had done to push Xcel to clean up their grid. We realized that we were on a pretty good pathway to reduce emissions, the grid intensity, the carbon intensity of our grid power. And it allowed us to think a little more strategically about the other areas that were really important to us. So in that year, we did go to our council, 2019, and then in early 2021, we went to council in the community. We talked very openly about our learnings around climate action locally. What is really effective when you think about locally based climate action? And the learnings from that were, I think you've heard these before as well, but we need to work more comfortably outside our boundaries. So how do we build coalition? How do we scale up action? How does individual behavior change, incremental change really support collective action at the neighborhood scale, at the city scale? And how do those collective actions support the big systems that we need to change in order to address climate? So that was one big learning. The other learning is this notion that what we describe as the nation state concept, that if a city was very effective in reducing emissions in their own jurisdiction, that another city would see that and they would model that, and then you just see this kind of take off, and that cities all across the country would actually do that. The idea that if you change your light bulb, and your neighbor will change your light bulb, and so on. And we realized doing some analysis with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and a couple of other firms, we did a study across the US to look at actual incorporated cities, how many have plans, how many are actually doing things with their plans, how many have made meaningful progress. And we realized pretty quickly that this idea that had been perpetuated for decades really wasn't happening at the speed and scale that was necessary. A couple of other things that were really important learnings. Resilience and equity needed to be central design pillars in our climate work. Not just kind of afterthoughts or appendages to our climate work. They needed to be really deeply rooted in how we design the programs and strategies. And policy needs to play a really critical role as well. And that's where I talk a lot about levers, pulling, 50 very small levers versus going to the state and pulling one big lever. How do you balance that in terms of resource, time, investment? So going to the state and passing legislation is like one big lever, in my opinion, a really good investment of resources. But simultaneously, how do we look at the most effective kind of local, smaller levers to pull? Hopefully, this background is totally mine, but I think it's relevant. So in 2021, that was also the time we went to council with a resolution 1300, to codify our current and most aggressive targets and goals. So and I use those words specifically because goals mean one thing in my mind versus a target or a milestone. So when we say we want to have zero-free or carbon-free electricity, that's a goal. It's not a percentage on the way to get to there. So we were very specific about we wanted to get to 100% renewable electricity by 2030. We want to have an 80% reduction in emissions, 70% reduction in emissions by 2030, community-wide across all sectors. That's energy, if you look at our emissions portfolio, a 70% reduction in emissions by 2030, to become net zero by 2035 and net positive by 2040. Really aggressive goals and aggressive targets along the way, yes.
What exactly is like a resolution mean when you say pass a resolution?
Yeah, really good question. So council has a few tools to really validate their support for a thing, for a policy statement. A declaration, councils will do declarations and they'll do resolutions. Declarations are like just kind of stating a thing, we're going to declare a day in honor of a certain thing. Resolutions have a little bit more teeth. There's an actual number associated. We have to outline how we're going to achieve a certain thing at a high level. And council effectively endorses that we're going to do the thing that's embedded in that resolution. And it's why we wanted to actually take our goals and targets, our climate-related goals and targets to council and do it through resolution. So we were very clear that, is council on board with this? Because we need you to backstop this as we think about our budgeting, as we think about our programming, as we think about the policies necessary to get us to achieve those goals and targets. So we did it by resolution. We said, here's what we aim to achieve and by when. Other goals, for example, like our net zero waste, our diversion, those are, it's a goal, but we haven't ratified that in a resolution.
Okay.
It's not legally binding, I will say that.
Yeah.
But it definitely has more teeth.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Good question. So that was done in 2021. Again, 70% by 2030 from a 2018 baseline. I know I'm talking to like math again, but the reason I want to emphasize that point is, if you remember, I talked about Kyoto, our climate commitment. It always matters what you're measuring against. What is that baseline that you're measuring against? And so by advancing it forward, I mean, we met our 1990, we met a Kyoto target. But that's not where our emissions are today. We need to be honest in our accounting. And so we moved that baseline up to 2018. And that makes it harder to achieve, but more meaningful to achieve as well. And if you might, if you recall, that's when we move forward with the idea of a consumption-based inventory. Again, honest accounting about goods and services that we as residents and citizens of this community pay for and contribute to. So, okay, I think we're kind of up to date now. Yes, all right. So we've always known that we were going to do an update to the climate action plan, but I want to make a point really, really clear. The 2021 framework, we describe it as a framework. It was not necessarily a climate action plan in the traditional sense. You can't go online and print it off and have like pretty pictures and like all kinds of neat charts and graphs. And that was very intentional. When we discussed this with council in 2021, we were at a really interesting point, even though it was just 3 years ago, how quickly things were changing in the landscape of climate and resilience. And what I did not want to commit to is spending a bunch of staff time trying to create this really snazzy, beautiful, polished document. And as soon as we get it done, it's really outdated. That just doesn't make sense. So we really, and we have limited staff resource and didn't really want to spend a lot of time trying to perfect a document that, I mean, let's be honest, not that many people read it. So what we told council very intentionally is that the framework that was outlined in our memo was really the framework that we were going to use over the next couple of years to really lean into this idea of this new space of locally based climate actions. It talked about our goals and targets, talked about our learning, talked about integrating equity and resilience as central design pillars, so some things I just shared with you. We're now at the point that we feel pretty solid that what we laid out there as framework is the right stuff. We have been very effective at talking with other jurisdictions across the country about how are we redesigning our framework around locally based climate action. Many cities are kind of following that pathway now, which is exciting. And so now we're ready to kind of roll out the next iteration of whatever it is. And so this would be more of a 2025 to 2030 kind of a 5-year strategy. And I want to emphasize that because we pin a lot to 2030. I think our science-based targets are oriented towards 2030 because we know we have to make meaningful progress by 2030. And so that's work backwards from there. And then when we establish these goals and targets, we need our community to understand that there is a plausible pathway to get from here to there. There are multiple pathways. There are a lot of ways you can put things together in order to achieve those goals. But in our opinion, we need our community to recognize there is a pathway to get there. It feels aspirational, it feels big, and it feels bold, but there is a roadmap. So that's really what this next update is intended to do. It's really focusing on first updating some of our goals and targets. In 2021, we didn't establish any real metric around resilience or equity. We talked about them as design principles, but no clear way to measure what that would look like. And so we're ready to bring some of those targets forward. We have some really good ideas that we've been working on around how do you build resilience, how do you quantify building a more resilient community. And same way around equity. It's not just numbers of things, but how do you assure that we're actually seeing the kind of equitable response to climate that we anticipated and want to do? And that can be something like investments of our tax dollars using Justice 40 as a guiding principle. So we have a lot of things that we want to bring forward as a package in that way. The other thing that I feel pretty strongly we need to do at this point is last year, because we didn't really have a thing to point to, like, hey, where's your climate action plan? And the link sends them to a council, which is like insane. That's not cool. Like, go read this like 80-page council memo and you get it. So like, that's not fair. So let's synthesize that and distill it down to something that somebody could actually do. You know, if you wanted to just kind of reflect on what are the major strategies, what are the goals and targets, what are the major strategies, what's the pathway to get from here to there, excuse me. It could be just like a 5-page document. Then we have a deeper dive where you can really dig deep into each of the sectors. Like, what are we doing around energy? What's included in energy? What's included in integrated solutions? What is our theory of change within each of those areas? And that's a term that we use a lot in the department to understand what are we trying to affect and by when, and how do we know when we get there? So really thinking theory of change is really important, and how just change circumstances. What do we know now that we didn't know a few years ago? What's changed? Not just we have to accelerate, but in what areas? How do we need to accelerate? And maybe energy generation is not our focus anymore because we kind of did it. And I don't say that lightly. And it's been a fight for a very long time, but we know we're going to be about 95% carbon-free electricity by 2030. That's amazing. And I think it'll be sooner than that, quite frankly. So what does that mean in terms of the remaining emissions? How do we shift this theory around it's just metric tons? How do we think about carbon not as a pollutant, but necessarily, but how do we put it back in the in where it needs to be? And so rehydrating soils, all the stuff that we talked about before. Okay, so what this is not, and this is going to be part of our challenge in bringing this forward, is a full-scale reboot of our climate action work. We're not going back and saying, here, let's do all these strategies. We kind of know what works, and so we want to continue doing what works. But we need to be very clear about why we believe those are the right strategies over the next 5 years, why they're going to get us where we need to go. So what's in scope is updating some of the goals and targets, and love to have a conversation with the board about what that looks like. We are going to really talk deeply about how we make the existing document more digestible for communities so we can communicate better about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because I'll be honest with you, I think we've not done a terribly good job over the last couple of years in that regard. We want people to be excited and understand the work that's going on. And I think there's a great literacy building opportunity too. When we talk about things like circular economy, that's a term that's not really welcoming. It doesn't make a lot of sense to people. It doesn't really resonate. So starting to think about language around what we're doing. More quantifiable goals and targets. I talked about that so we can have a dashboard. We already have some dashboards out there in Boulder Measures. So I'll give you an example. People get really excited, I do too, about when we developed our 100% renewable electricity target. We had a very specific metric around megawatts of installed capacity of renewables. I think we talked about this before. We hit that target. It's a 2030 target. We hit it 2 years ago. We just revisited the amount. And so that is to get to 100 megawatts of locally installed renewable generation. By 2030, we're at 120 today. So we're on our way to our 2035 target already, but we'd like to update that target. Instead of just saying, let's just do more solar, let's change that target and start to think about how we're using solar to achieve our true goal. So thinking about resilience. So let's start to add in things like storage. Let's add in some numeric targets around the open grid technologies or storage, neighborhood or individual storage technologies, and looking at that reliability of our energy supply. Using solar to make sure our most vulnerable are protected during times of more frequent outages. So we're going to try to shape that target into something that's a little bit more meaningful rather than just, let's just do more solar. So that's been, I think, a really cool conversation we're having within our team as well.
Are there quantitative measures that you're discussing associated with that? It feels like it could be a very qualitative space.
Yes. And one of the ways we look at energy right now is energy burden. So that is the percentage of a typical household income that goes towards energy related expenses. And so you might imagine that in lower income households, you're spending a lot on energy related expenses because you have to commute further because you can't afford to live here. You have lower quality appliances, less efficient appliances. Your home or apartment is less efficient. Therefore, you may use less overall, but the percentage of your cost is higher. So we look at energy burden and trying to levelize and get that down so we don't see these spikes in energy burden in specific sectors of the population, as an example. Kilowatt hours of storage. The ability to use, there are indices that we use for reliability around the system duration and frequency of outages. I mean, make no mistake, we are going to see more and more outages. We just, we're on the PUC, Public Utilities Commission meeting this morning, and what we know, if you know that power went out again in the downtown area and in Chautauqua and Louisville over the weekend. Whenever there's a red flag warning, Xcel is going to utilize their public safety power shutoff protocol. So we're going to see more frequent and longer duration outages. So how do we think about connecting storage to vulnerable community members that are on oxygen, for example? So there are a lot of things that we can do numerically and quantitatively to kind of track how we're making that progress. Yeah, excellent question. And I'm almost done with this. A couple other things that we're looking to do in this update are really showcasing the role of government versus community. This is an area that we've always struggled with, going back to the very original climate action plan when it was a fascinating situation where we talked about it as the city's climate action plan. And so community, we're left with, well, then the city's got this. Like, well, no, this is our community's climate action plan and everyone plays a role in this. You should see yourself, no matter, you don't have to be a climate scientist, an energy expert to take meaningful action on climate. You can do what you can do. But what is the role of government? What is the role of the private sector? What is the role of our governmental institutional partners? And so we're really trying to kind of continue to shine a little bit more light on that. So everyone has a clear sense of like, tell me what I should do. Give me my top 3 things. What should I do? We have a really good sense of what you actually should do here in Boulder, not just generally speaking, but here in Boulder, what you should do to help us achieve our goals. And we're also in a really cool place now where we can start to, let me pause, because the other thing that I meant to say in this introduction is that council, during their council retreat, you might recall, made the updated climate action plan their 11th priority. They normally stop at 10, they made an exception, and they called this one their 11th priority. And the reason they did that is that because when I was asked, I said, this is already on our work plan. We are intending to do this anyway. So this isn't a big lift. At the time, council was very interested in adding some dimension to that update. Goals and targets around biodiversity, as an example. So we're exploring that as well. LA has a really cool system for measuring biodiversity, as an example. We're doing some really cutting edge work in that space. I share that with you because there was some comment from council at the time, really interested in starting to build in a lot of the other kind of key areas that we know are connected to climate into the climate action plan, like water. I'm not supportive of that, and the reason being is that we have a lot of master plans, and we're trying to change the title of master plans, but we have lots of strategic plans that where things like water quality, water quantity, we talk about drought, those all live in their own plans and they go very deep. We don't need to take that and put it into a climate action plan. What we need to do is in our document, talk about the relevance and importance and connectedness to water as an example, and direct people to here's where it lives. And that document should connect to and reference the climate action plan, just like ours should reference the Grasslands Master Plan and the Boulder Valley Comp Plan. And so the specific strategies live within those documents, and the climate action plan just talks about how relevant those areas are and how it helps shape kind of our policies and programs moving forward. So yes, please.
With like the water department, obviously you have priorities around climate action. Does the water priority, like would they have to prioritize sustainability above their other stuff that they're working on already? Is that like in their mission?
Fantastic question. I would not say above, but and this is, you kind of led me right into my comment, which was, we are now at this place where we have such good alignment across the departments. So it once was a situation that climate was kind of, I use that term again, appendage, right? We're out over here. We're like, hey, we deal with water quality and delivering safe water. You guys do the climate stuff over there. We now have a strategic plan. We have the Sustainability, Equity, and Resilience Framework, the SARE framework that sits up above and guides every department to map towards those outcomes, sustainability, equity, and resilience. And so not only do we have the kind of that architecture in place, but we have a really good connection and relationship with the other departments. And so when I talked to Joe Tabucci, the Director of Utilities, like, hey, we are going to update our water efficiency plan next year. You all need to be in that. We need to talk about what are the long-term forecasts and implications of climate? What do we need to think about in terms of extreme heat and drought? How do we think about this differently? What do you all know that we need to be referencing? Similarly, we're meeting next week with Open Space. They've developed their own open space climate action plan, which is very cool on how they think about their lands, how they think about ecosystems that they oversee, really backstopping against the work that we have out there. So
Not like overlapping things.
there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but not redundancy. And so what they're doing is referencing, yes, the city, we have this broader objective around climate. Here's how we as a department are doing our part of that.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing a lot more of that take shape. Facilities master plan is an example. is really starting to look at how we think about our buildings and the carbon intensity of not just our energy supply, but obviously the embedded carbon in our buildings.
Do you guys do you advise other departments? Because I imagine they're not,
Yes,
you guys are experts in climate, so
yes.
meeting that.
That's been, I'm sorry. talk over
Oh,
you.
no,
No, it's that our role has changed a lot where we were kind of trying to push and like, here comes the green team. And,
yeah,
now, a lot of departments, do consult with us pretty regularly on whether it's updates to plans or specific projects.
Yeah.
And so our role has shifted a little bit in terms of thought leadership. But at the same time, there is great thought leadership within the other departments. They are really starting to build their same. Okay, that was a lot. Just to conclude, revisit again, my hope is we will have a built-out engagement plan over the next month or so. We have a team that's been working on this. We'd like to come back and talk to the board about specifically what we are thinking around the updates to the goals and targets, a little bit around the engagement, what might we be missing. But clarifying that we're not going out and doing a whole new climate action plan. So we don't need to go out and say, hey, what do you all want to see in the climate action plan? That's not what we want to do. But the parts that we are going to be updating, we do want to get some good feedback and input from our community. All right, I promise the other ones won't be nearly as long.
So I have another follow-up question in like you were saying, we want to go beyond just installing more solar, but what is it that we do with our renewable energy? How do we increase resilience, equity, et cetera? We were talking about levers earlier. What sorts of ways do you actually change that? If you see, you have quantitative metrics and seeing holes somewhere, gaps to fill, how do you then go about actually enacting that change?
Yeah, I think the answer to the question is who the you is in that equation. Because you meaning a department and local government, the powers that we have, what we would look at is to say, okay, where are the barriers for adopting? Do we have restrictions on doing more locally based storage, like neighborhood scale storage? The answer is yes. Our codes are problematic. So we need to think about how we can kind of clear that pathway. How do we think about things like microgrids? So that's a term you've probably heard. That is the ability to kind of isolate part of our system, put in storage and backup and isolate it during times of emergency. So that way, if you think about a critical facility, say it's the hospital or emergency operations center, and Excel de-energizes the system purposefully, or there's an emergency and we lose power, that microgrid kicks on and draws off the batteries that are there for storage. And so our codes and right now don't allow for, it's not just our codes, but there's actual business practices and legislation that doesn't allow cross property sharing of electricity. So like I got to use here, I got a big warehouse and I can put solar on the roof and the hospital's right there. They don't have any property to do a bunch of energy generation and storage. Let's generate it and store it here, and then we'll feed it to them when they need it. You can't cross a public right of way. So how do we deal with that? So the you to us would be thinking about where we want to go, and then how do we kind of remove some of those restrictions and barriers and incentivize? I think that's a big piece of it too. So now we're starting to look at, I just mentioned this $200 million grant that we got for beneficial electrification, which is going to be contractor training, job training, really focusing in on what does it look like to electrify the right buildings? What are some of the technologies that we can look at for the commercial industrial sector, pilot some of those technologies so we can move a little more rapidly in that space. You had a look and I want to come back to it. The peculiar puzzle look.
I'm just state guidelines baffle me sometimes as they pertain to like right of ways and CDOT railways.
Yeah. That's you're talking about microgridding? Is that?
It was the specifically like cross building, like energy sharing being
Yes.
disallowed.
Do you know what the premise of that is?
Oh, yeah, it's wheeling of power. So Excel owns the distribution system and the thought process is if you are going to that's the term called wheeling power. So let's just say, I'm almost gonna get up and drop, I'm not gonna do it. If you can imagine, I'll just use the example of, well, let's say we're talking about Alpine Balls, right? So the new facility that's gonna be up there. One piece of the property, there was actually multiple parcels there. So they are different properties owned by different entities, right? So there's a piece of property that the city owns that has parking structure on it. So let's say we want to put solar on top of that roof in order to impede the use on the other parts of the building. Let's make it a little bit more dramatic. Let's just say we generated a lot of electricity there with solar and Ideal across the way said, hey, we would love to use some of that electricity because we lease our building, we can't put it on our roof, or we have a bunch of appurtenances and architectural shading, we can't do it. Great, we'd love to do that. We have to use Excel's distribution lines to wheel the power from where we are across the street. Excel would then say, well, you need to pay us what's called the open access transmission tariff in order to, it's like a tollway. You got to pay them to use their lines. In many cases, there's not capacity on their lines because they use their capacity. The other issue then is that we are now competing with them directly because we are selling electricity. And this is what's prohibited by the state in a state where we are a regulated monopoly. So Excel gets the exclusive right to serve customers. If we as the city are serving a customer because we are generating and they're consuming, we are now an independent power producer. And that is, so trying to break some of those log jams, we have some work going there. The Public Utilities Commission just convened a big microgridding analysis and session. So they're really trying to figure out where our policies are misaligned, and then how do we think about doing what we want to do, which is sharing across different boundaries where it makes sense.
So shock no one, it is capitalism. Yep.
You would hope that Excel has its limits, right? And they're either struggling or choose not to do a lot of things that are necessary that are coming into play with climate change, hotter days, more wildfires, etc. You would hope that they play well with everyone.
You would hope.
You would hope, right? Because this helps them. It's like the power failure this past weekend. It could have been avoided, maybe if there were microgrids and storage and local solar farms or whatever.
See, but if there are microgrids and everyone's getting to supply their own power, they lose out on profit. And if you lose out on profit, then you're failing. And if you're failing, then everything's failing. Like, it's just like, it's
Yeah.
unregulated capitalism with like a state endorsed monopoly on power. It doesn't matter how like minute the profits they lose in the short term for a day or two outage, because they're winning in the long term because they have a fucking monopoly across the whole state that the state is endorsing. So it doesn't matter.
Which will change. I feel like it will change because these things are coming into place so often now. It's like all the people's power outages. You're just sitting around and you're like, oh, power, why? It's too hot. It's wind, it's bad.
Yeah, I think there are potentially big enough factors that cause them to at least reevaluate, like the municipalization effort did ultimately lead to some
Yes.
improvement in cleanliness, if you will. So there may be some ways to push it, but at the end of the day.
Well, that's the thing, is there are ways to push it and ways to force Excel into becoming more climate conscious and giving that space for people to do that, but that's not gonna come from them. It's never gonna start from them. If they
I
are
wanna give
pushed
them a
into a
little bit of
space.
credit, and there are a number of factors, right? The Public Utilities Commission and the state legislature and the General Assembly obviously create the backstop and the rules that require the utility to do certain things. What we have seen through our partnership is that they really are looking at ways to really advance a lot of the technologies and solutions. What we're seeing coming out of the wildfire mitigation plan, there's some really interesting things there. They're looking at ways to really help support aggressive undergrounding program. We just partnered with them on an application for virtual power plants. And so this idea of microgrids is very connected to the idea of virtual power plants, when you can look at a whole neighborhood of, kind of to your point, you have a bunch of people with solar on their roofs. Well, if you can organize that resource, not just one home, but if you can look at that neighborhood and think about it as a microgrid, then the utility can think about that as a virtual power plant. So during times of peak demand, when people turn on their air conditioning, you have a whole neighborhood generating a couple megawatts of solar. How do we compensate those customers and actually draw that power onto the grid during times that it's most necessary, so we don't have to turn on heating and gas plants? So we have a plan with Xcel to do a little bit of that, looking at some geothermal. And so I think to your point, the challenge is cost recovery, always. I mean, they are a for-profit entity. And so if they can do this in a way that secures profit, that's our reality. And we need to work with that. But I also think that they are really recognizing the risks, the future risks, particularly in the gas side of their business. And so, whether it's a smart business practice to say, let's electrify everything because we sell more kilowatt hours, sure, that's fine. Support electrification. How do they want to deal with their gas side of the business is, definitely a challenge. Anyway, we kind of devolved into that.
That's my bad.
No, not at all, not at all.
I'll take any chance I have to rail against capitalism. What's the point in being the angry child if you can't be angry?
So that's it with the cap update. Like I said, we'll be back with you. I don't have a date specific yet, but would like to come back to you. I just wanted you all to get a sense in case you're kind of hearing or wondering what's going on with it. That's what's going on.
So shall we talk about the Congress that the mayor and Mr. Karen went to?
Yeah, this one can be relatively quick. I wanted you to be aware, and I don't know how many of the board members who are familiar and know what ICLEI is. Is that okay? So ICLEI is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. It's an organization that was founded back in 1990, and it's the network of local and regional governments that really work on sustainability more broadly. They are active in 125 countries, and so ICLEI is pretty influential and pretty big, mostly in Europe, but there is obviously ICLEI North America, and they are actually officed out of Denver, and so we're very close with the executive director and have worked with ICLEI for a very long time. As you might expect, Boulder has had this kind of interesting relationship with ICLEI, where we were outpacing. They kind of designed programs to get cities kind of off the ground and moving on sustainability. And a decade ago, we were like light years ahead, and sort of like, not much value, but we want to stay connected to them because I think as a Vanguard city, we can help kind of pull them in the right direction. And so they've been great partners to work with. And what I really appreciate about that is they have really shifted based on a lot of our input over the last couple of years. Their approach is really driving action around nature-based solutions, around equity, around resilience, and a circular economy. So we talked to them kind of about our model, and now they're kind of using that model across their whole network of cities, which is pretty cool. So the ICLEI Congress just happened in Brazil, and the Congress happens every 3 years. And it's really about creating a process where official representatives from the world kind of get together, they talk about key issues, challenges, it's opportunities, it's highly political because a lot of the ICLEI representation are elected officials, which is a good thing. Matt Applebaum, our former mayor, was on the regional executive committee for many years and kind of represented David Driscoll, because you might remember David. He was our planning director and led our kind of sustainability effort for a couple of years. He's on the board now. Right now, the Fort Collins mayor is the North American rep to the ICLEI Congress for the next 3 years, which is awesome. So we have a great connection there. And the other thing that the Congress does is give an opportunity for cities to really showcase some of the leading edge sustainability work that's going on at the local scale. And when you have local officials there, elected officials, kind of seeing some of those ideas as policymakers, they take those things back to their cities. And so it's really action oriented, which I think is really cool. So we were invited, we have a strong connection to ICLEI in many regards. We lead several of the working groups. And we were invited this year to share our work in plastics reduction and in circular economy. And then at the end, we were invited to talk about water systems and watershed protection as well, which was a little bit different. So the mayor was invited to attend. Fred Kincairn, who we've met on my staff, also went. He is leading one of the cohorts around nature-based solutions. So he was there to do a number of kind of conversations and building some energy and doing some training for some of the other jurisdictions. The thing that was really cool is that we made some really good contacts at the Congress, direct connections between our mayor and the mayor of Cali, Colombia. And Cali is the host of the UN COP on biodiversity. So you might remember there are 3 conference of parties. There is the big COP, the climate COP. There is also a COP on desertification and a COP on biodiversity, the lesser COPs. We were present at the biodiversity COP last year in Montreal, and it will be in Cali coming up this October. What's cool about that is that that biodiversity COP is a really critical juncture for cities to adhere to what is being kind of labeled the next round of protocols, just like out of the climate COP, protocols around the importance of biodiversity. So this is increasingly more and more important as a gathering of world leaders. So right now we are looking to have, and also the mayor of Belém, Brazil, and they were the host of the 2025 climate COP. So our mayor was able to make some of those connections at the ICLEI Global Congress, and in fact has then extended the mayor of Cali's extended the invitation to our mayor to go to Cali, and then we would also have a staff person there as well. So yeah, I just wanted you all to be aware of that. Pretty exciting stuff. I will send out a link. There's a great recap of the events that took place at the Congress. There's a little video piece that I think we did, and I'll just send that link out for all of you if you'd like to see it.
So I have a question. Do you know if at these things, is it ever shared what doesn't work well? I just, I imagine in many realms of academia or conferences, the things that work get highlighted, but ideally you also don't want to waste your time with something people have tried that failed.
Yeah, I think it depends on who's giving the talk. And this is not a dig on elected officials, but electeds like to be the champion of successful things, and that's fine. So I think there are a lot of workshops that take place both at the COPs and at these congresses where it really is workshopping. It's really talking about what are our challenges, what are the collective things that we need to be doing, what's not working. And very similarly, I'll be at the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance annual meeting, and that's exactly what we do. We spend the entire time talking about course correction, what's really not working, and not just like giving speeches to one another. Cool. Because I don't want to go do that. I mean, exotic locations, sure, but Cool. So other questions, thoughts? Again, just an update, but wanted to be there.
Seeing no participation on that. That sounded like that was a dig at people. I wasn't. I was bad phrasing.
It was a me.
Yes, it's your fault. No, let's move on and chat about the plant-based challenge we've been bouncing around for the last few weeks. Yeah, I say weeks like we meet more frequently than we do. It's been like 2-3 months we've been talking about this. Yeah, so we're hoping to have here for our discussion, but unfortunately he is not here.
I think we can vote with her.
I mean, we have quorum, so legally speaking, yes, we can. So, yeah, I'll turn this over to Jonathan and.
I'll just tee it up and then I promise I will stop talking. Like let you all just kind of handle this. So I threw together just a really brief memo in your packet. It's just some thoughts that I had in my head that might be useful in thinking about the background of this. Yeah, so this, just as a refresher, this came up. It was something that was shared with me as a kind of an interesting idea, and using the power of boards and commissions to really champion a message. And as I mentioned in the memo, I think it was kind of exciting to see the advice that Denver was getting to try to move in this direction. We as a board obviously do this as regular business practice, but not all boards do. And in fact, I think we've had some discussion about how do we start to kind of move in the direction of dealing with some of the single-use plastics, working with vendors that really adhere to some of our core principles as an organization. And so remember, the idea was I heard about this, wanted to bring it to all of you. There are a few ways that you could think about this. You could consider some type of, and if there's analysis or anything that you'd like from staff, we can certainly provide that for you. But it could just be something, I call it a challenge, because it could be a letter to the other board chairs, it could be a letter to the other boards, a bit of a campaign to encourage them to move in this direction, providing them with some resources on how do you move in this direction. And again, what I had seen, and I did a little bit of research, not many places do this, and often they don't make it mandatory. What they say is it's like, that is the default is plant-based diets, and they talk about why they do that. But if there is a board member that wants an animal protein, they can order that separately. So I will leave it to the board and your capable hand to talk about whether this is something you'd like to do and how you'd like to structure it. You don't have to complete it all tonight. You can give some instruction back to me, and I can take it back to my team to support you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is your area of expertise, so
Yes,
you
thank
have
you,
the floor.
guys. I did some work on this that I'd like to propose, a place to start. So I created a letter we can send to other boards. I made a deck, a pitch deck. Did you guys? I think I sent it to you guys.
I'm
You
doing
did,
a-
you did that. You did that for last week.
You did? Yeah.
It's currently kind of in copy now, I haven't seen.
Oh, no, it's okay. I said,
information.
I said, here's some information, you don't have to look at it, you don't have to. I didn't want to give you guys more.
do you wanna?
I mean, I can go through the deck. Well, I guess here, I'll go through the whole thing and talk about that. So my proposal would be, we adopt it as a board formally. We invite the other boards in on the action. I also think we should go to council. So West Hollywood, California's council just adopted this as one of the other places in addition to Denver. Denver, I'm not sure. I think their council did adopt it. I know it started with the boards and the council's working on it too. So
When you say council adopts it, do you mean that any meals that council brings in that are following this practice, or like council is enacting something to say all cities, staff?
Yeah, just further.
I mean, if council wanted to go, above and beyond, and be like, hey, all of city staff, any city base, like.
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate idea. So kind of starting small, encouraging others, getting council, and then saying, okay, because it is a very inclusive, like you said, policy is the right word, inclusive practice, suggestion, yes, practice. There's, not as much hurdles, it's not like saying like everyone has to be. And I think that will take a little bit of explaining to people, I think that's what I'm using. So I have these letters, I have this information, love feedback and make sure it feels good about it. Also in terms of people are interested in reaching council, I think there's a couple of ways to do it. We could just send them all an email, but yeah, I think the better way would be, I would be happy to let people have office hours and stuff, so I can see the idea a little bit more one-on-one, either as an individual or as a EAB member, depending on what you guys are comfortable with. And then once I've kind of floated the idea, that buy-in individually, then we can kind of get a formal resolution
Yeah.
from council. I drafted also some resolutions that I pretty much stole from Never. Because I just updated language. They already built work. So that, let me see, any other questions? I made some fact sheets too. And I have 2 different versions, more like FAQ and then a fact sheet. And then I think the idea would be to ask them to sign, I don't know if it's a declaration or resolution, something, if they adopt it. And then ideally get some press around it and reach out to the folder reporting lab. Tim, I know, would like this. I'm guessing by the conversation I had with him on our letter, that when we reached out about that. So, and then from there, I do think the stuff that gets interested starts small. So that's,
I think that it would happen concurrently, the reach to other boards and city council timeline. I don't
I
think
think
that city
so.
council would need to necessarily wait on their board's adoption.
I don't think so.
I mean, that can happen sort of concurrently. If you want to meet with them one-on-one, then challenging the other boards can be done sort of send out an email and just sort of happen all at once. And if we want to include council members, we can, or if we want to talk to council members,
Yeah.
then that would just by nature take a little bit more time to get
Yeah.
through.
My guess is it would be more effective because, they're very busy, an email
Right.
coming to their inbox about, making meals,
Yeah.
vegetarian, vegan, whatever, that's
Even
low
if,
priority for their attention.
even if they read over emails, which they might not all do.
Yeah.
They get so many emails.
Yeah, but
about
you're gonna
relevant and important things.
So I think, attending office hours
Yeah.
and talking one-on-one seems like a good way. Do you think, and maybe you have a strong opinion on this, is it more effective, if we send one representative, if a couple of us go at a time, or we can coordinate, kind of go in a pair to one, go another pair to,
Yeah, thanks. I just would offer a slight amendment to that pathway that so the board could consider. It seems like that there's support and excitement for going in this direction, and I guess it would be helpful to know, would you like to approach all of the other kind of council boards and commissions as well as council, and kind of the challenge to all of the boards that basically use taxpayer dollars to buy food. And I think it's just a bit incongruent with kind of our philosophy and thinking about climate, and it's just an important thing that we can do. It's more than symbolic, and it should have an impact. So one way to think about this is, and I would actually ask Heather to weigh in on this too. One opportunity is to send a letter to each of the board chairs and then to the board reps, so they both can understand, because obviously it's the chair that would need to think about that as I'll call it a policy, an informal policy of the board, and then guiding their administrative support to change the way they do that. And then for council, one option that you could consider is, rather than trying to do this in writing, either a board representative or multiple members of the board could go to a council meeting and an open comment might draw a little bit more attention.
You only get 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although you can combine.
You can,
Oh, interesting.
between multiple individuals.
Yeah, so if two of us
I can
went,
pull it.
you could pull
Yeah.
together for one minutes.
and that could look
Or
Like
is it
something
max
like-
capped at 4 minutes?
It was, I mean, I think it's
6
It's 5
think it's like
total.
I mean, it's good to be great, so.
It's 2 minutes per individual. It's, and also I feel like it is something that can be communicated relatively
Yeah.
concisely, like off the top of my head, I think I could come up with a 30-second elevator pitch right now.
Totally.
So, yeah, I think going to public comment would be great, like as board representatives,
Yeah.
however many of us want to do
I
that.
like that. I still like the idea of maybe reading with all of them, but most of them ahead of time.
Yeah.
Because then they can ask questions and then we can kind of use it as a public pressure.
Yeah.
Not pressure.
And you could decide whether you want to have those conversations before, so you don't take them off board, but I don't think that, I think it's a friendly thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
It's basically
totally.
like, hey, this is an exciting opportunity, we as a board, this is what we're doing, we challenge you, council, to
Yeah,
follow our lead, and we're reaching out to the other boards, let's do this, here are
Yeah.
the reasons why, I'm gonna give you the 5 reasons why we think this is a really powerful statement to
Yeah,
be
that's
done,
great.
and are you with us, council?
Right, taking action rather than.
Right. and I also think I'm happy to offer to admin folks, like, I mean, we talked about too, but like support, and was like, oh no, that sounds really hard.
Just say we like having a very explicit, like low barriers to entry.
Yeah.
You know, it can sound overwhelming of, wow, we have to totally rethink how we order this. This creates a lot of extra work, right? It's kind of like a prepared like list of suggestions of.
Right, I don't wanna put too much work on you, Heather, but this is something that we have been doing sort of informally as a board for a while, so I'm sure you have a sort of like list of places that are more doable to do this from.
There's actually a shared list across all admin staff across the city that we've identified places that provide zero waste services, like our Deliver Zero containers, so this could be an easy.
Do that.
Oh, that's
It
great.
could be suggested menu items that are vegetarian or vegan or whatever, and add it to that spreadsheet.
It's good to know there's already infrastructure for the
How
dissemination.
much people use it is another story, but we can, there's a good opportunity to research.
Right,
Okay.
So they're calling this the plant-based challenge, but there is talk about reducing waste in there. So is there any reason to change the name?
well, I think that this specifically what we're talking about is like about plant-based, so like the reduction in waste is already something that's happening independently. Like, unless you disagree.
Voluntarily
Well,
or.
Well, I think from the city side, I think the majority of our departments that host either board and commission meetings or any kind of type of public meetings, they try their best to do that, and they work with restaurants and businesses. And I'll just use an example. I'm not trying to throw in buckets, but like a Chipotle, right? So they bring all of their things for like a little taco bar, and everything they bring is disposable plastics. It's tongs, it's the metal hangers, everything is just like single use. And it's hard. It's hard for, I think, restaurants to kind of make that shift, which is why we've been supporting them with a lot of incentives to go in that direction. I don't think that will happen overnight, but I can guarantee that you can walk over there and in that room over there or upstairs, you open a drawer and it would be filled with plastic tongs. It will be filled with all of this disposable one.
I have those
Well, it's
great
not just everyone's
compostable utensils that are now worthless.
Yeah.
Even when you request them not to send them, it's such a habit that they just send them anyways. So
I'm obviously very anti-waste, and I think that would dilute, like, I think it's a little confusing.
Yeah,
We do
there,
both.
there's
Maybe-
separate things.
maybe
Like,
we do this and then we
could-
I think I was gonna
Spaces.
say you could do like next year's challenge, you know,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
and kind of see how people
Do we
rise to
wanna
the
start an
occasion.
annual EAB?
Annual
like,
challenge.
challenge?
You should.
I love that, I love that.
We could like add it as like a footnote, if you need help, we can help you with that too, but I think it'd be confusing.
Yeah, I think just keep them like sort of entirely separately, and I think that also one leads into the other. I think like if you're ordering from more vegetarian vegan places, I think that those are gonna tend towards the more environmentally sustainable than your Chipotle is, right? And so that's gonna be sort of like, it's not gonna be a like cure all, right? But it's a tend in a direction, and then you can like.
Yeah.
Cause like, I know that Chipotle is not gonna change their like catering services for,
EAB, no?
based on the AAB, certain, like, even just for like a whole city, like, they're not gonna change their catering practices for one city. Whereas if you're going to like the local restaurant, like one of in Boulder, or like three of in Boulder, Fort Collins and Lyons, right? Then they're gonna be more like open to changing into more reusable catering. Because it's just less of a hassle to do it for one city, right? So
So in terms of next steps,
I think our first next step is just ratifying. this.
Oh, so what do we do for ourselves sitting, this is our official policy rather than something we
So-
officially do?
So you said that you had some sort of a draft of a like,
yes. Well, it was more of the one for council, but I think it was like a very,
I mean,
but I think the idea is it's plant-based by default.
Mhm.
If anyone wants to request menu items, they do. They have some stuff around, which I don't think we need to do for ours. But for big events, they're like, if you put the meat in during the middle of the buffet, they've done all this testing of like what produces animal product. But for us, we have to worry about where things are in the
we have
buffet.
such an extensive buffet, all 2 items.
So perhaps for, I don't know, bigger events, if the city were to like adopt something, you know, bigger events, I think that would come for us.
So much.
So
So do we,
I think, here's my suggestion, we call for a motion to, this is sort of, it could help me do, is to be called for a motion for the board to get together and prepare documentation, which could be a letter to the council and the power plant, right? And then, you know, once we've all agreed on it, because I'm not ready to ratify that, but I'm to read it, I'm just trying to click on it. I didn't have access to the letter. So anyway, that's fine.
so that would not require a motion to sort of like say let's work on language. So what we can do is we can
Just can't
just,
do it first, correct?
I mean, any official vote has to take place, like if you want to ratify a position that we want to take as a board, that needs to happen during.
No, I meant like us working on drafting, say, a letter or drafting some sort of.
Up to the two of us could work on that outside of meeting hours.
Well, we
The
can,
restriction is
We
like,
can't
is
get together.
we cannot get together in groups of more than 3 and discuss official policy at a like noticed and televised or broadcasted meeting. So, but we
can
can
you
meet
work on
as,
Google Doc? If there's one Google
Yes.
Doc and.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just if there are like more than X number active, you can't.
it
Technically,
gets a
I don't know how they
little,
track that, but
it gets a little bit trickier when it's like working on something as a collective. That gets a little bit sketchier.
I don't think we'll all be in the dark.
it
Well,
didn't happen
it's
with
not
the
even, it's not
other-
even about at the same time, it's about like, in terms of council, like if you send an email about a policy and one other council member will respond with an email about the same policy, you cannot continue that discussion chain with council members.
So if we start getting
So
That's
this is
fine,
all
like,
sun-
this is-
sunshine laws, just want to be really
Yeah.
transparent that if you're gonna work on a document, what you could do is you could have that digital document that everyone is contributing into. You're just not having conversation about it, meaning you get on the phone, like, can we all just like get on a Zoom call and talk about and just do like group editing right now? That's not okay. And then once you have whatever you want, that's gonna be an official position of the board, you can bring that back here if you want to do that, but again, this is the position of the board. I would suggest if you want to do some kind of roll call vote or something around, just assuming that this is gonna be the protocol that you adopt as a board, I think that would be helpful to do.
So we could do sort of like an informal without language, like this is our,
So the board will work, so there's a motion for the motion that the board will work on proposing on a plant-based challenge for.
No, what I
That's
was
what you
suggesting is that you as a board, if you want to adopt that as a policy, I think it's probably important that you do that by vote to say, from this point forward, this will be our policy as the environmental advisory group.
yes.
Secondarily, there is, I think, this kind of work piece that's gonna flow out, which is fine.
So I will prefer the motion to adopt the informal plant-based challenge vote as it pertains to the environmental advisory board. Great, now, all in favor? Okay, with one abstaining, that passes. Or with one absent. He's not abstaining, it's just not here. So now, in terms of what we're proposing to other boards, we don't have to vote on anything about that tonight. We just, when we come back with official language, then if we want it to be an official EAB position, then we have to vote on whatever is coming back before us as a official thing. Right, so if we're gonna work on this challenge to other boards, we don't have to be like, we don't have to vote on working on that for the moment. But when we come back with a finished product,
Yeah, and you really, you don't need to be taking a vote on a process necessarily. If there is a document that is representing the voice of the board, it's probably a good idea to vote on that, just to make sure that everybody is clear that you as a board are speaking with one voice. So if that's the form of a letter, or it's a document that someone will read in front of council, that's probably the thing that you want to be voting on.
So I can send everyone my draft letter to the boards. Fact sheet, FAQ that goes with it. The draft, the resolution that Denver used at least, that we can send to council. And then a written statement for public comment, if you guys like that idea for the moment, or.
For bringing to board.
Yeah, so you
for
can
bringing it to council.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I have not written yet, but we'll just take from it, which would be. And then everyone can add comments and stuff.
Yeah.
Can I, do I have everyone's email
Yeah,
addresses?
because when you sent it to the group,
Yeah,
so you sent it to Heather and copy the group
but I don't think I have your email.
individually.
You send it to environmental advisory board at,
Yeah,
it'll go to all of us.
okay, great, I can also just make it.
Well, and then when you send the link to it, just make sure that the sharing gets.
Yeah, sure, that's just, okay,
Permissions and everything.
Yeah. permission.
great.
And so then we can get that.
When we send letters to other boards for something like this,
Mhm.
you know, we're sending it to their chair, does it have to come from our chair? Does, you know, Brooke have to be the official signee on it, or can it come from all of us? Can it, what does that
Yeah,
actually need to be?
it's pretty unusual. We don't do much of this. So I think there's no real specific way to do it. My thought is there are a few things that I have in my head that I would want to do. I want to make sure that I just run this past the city manager so she has awareness. I mean, obviously you all can do what you want to do just so there's awareness. I'll probably just send out a note to the other board liaisons just to give them a heads up that this is coming. And I think a letter is probably good to come from the entire board. I think you can all sign it.
I'll also offer if boards want more information, like go to this meetings. I can't imagine it would be, but.
Yeah.
That's an honor we can make.
I don't just wanna like default on you doing all the work here. But
We also want to
you're-
recognize your expertise.
You are
Yes.
far and away the expert in this as compared to the rest of us,
Yeah.
so I appreciate all the work you've been doing off camera.
She's got a big smile on her face.
I
Oh,
love
no,
it.
you look
I
so
also
much
like
better.
have some time.
Well, this was one of your priorities. so That's why I wanted to bring this back. So
Yeah. Thank you.
The other thing that you all might want to consider too is just, I cannot imagine a world in which the board would say just flat out no.
Yeah.
Um,
It would be entertaining if they did.
well,
We're happy.
but just a little bit of that tracking, if there's something we want to do on kind of the back end, just to see like the impact of that. And so we have
I made a
whatever 22
spreadsheet.
boards in commission.
Hands on it.
How many of those boards, you already have this?
I have a spreadsheet.
I'm just gonna stop.
We have a lot. I was surprised at how many boards we have. That's not a lot. Department.
Yes.
Yeah.
And departments do a lot of food ordering.
Can I ask a clarifying question, just to make sure I heard it correctly with this definition?
So you're going to send out the, with the materials for people to provide. Is the intent that during the next meeting, you will approve that as a board and agree to send that out, or is the intent to send it out prior to the next board meeting?
The intent is to work on and come back to our next meeting with a finalized draft of the letter that we're gonna send to other boards, as well as a sort of like direct plan forward, and then finalize that at our next meeting, and then send that out.
In the meantime, is it possible for us to either have not necessarily access to the admin spreadsheet, but is there some way that we can reference via you that this spreadsheet exists? Or, you know, if we're coming up with either the FAQ section or just for your further reading, or, you know, to make this easier, like the fact that that exists. Maybe we don't want that completely available to everyone, but is there a way to reference that?
I think so. I'm pretty sure we can share it. I can make the link public. I do want to be cautious about, you know, recommending one business over another.
Well, because in my mind, we should not do that to any business ideas, that's
No.
not. But almost all businesses have vegan and vegetarian options, some a little bit more than others. Like some places, the only vegetarian option is French fries, right? But, or onion rings. And then there are places where it's more options, but I don't feel comfortable linking to specific businesses.
Well, I think it might be worth, and I don't know if this would be more of a you thing, Heather, of like, we have the official letter that we send to like the other boards, but then like a letter that gets sent to the staff members responsible as sort of like a separate thing of like, here is recommended logistics, here's what has worked for us, as like two separate things.
I think that sounds reasonable. I'm also happy to be included as a point of contact with other admin being important to finding that options.
Because we can't go, these are the businesses that we recommend ordering from, but like, these are the businesses that we have been ordering from that have been working well for us.
Yeah.
Like,
Or even like
these
you said,
are the
as simply as like,
strategies that we have been using.
yeah, listing you as point of contact and strategies.
Yeah. So I think that would be the best way to avoid that stickiness of supporting specific businesses in official paperwork. Yeah. Okay, do we have more on this that we want to be anything that needs to be done today that needs to be done before we're working on formalizing?
No, I'll just say that this may feel like a small little thing, but I feel like it's a real, like we were talking about earlier, being like examples from other cities, and I think it's a really big deal. Like
So,
Europe is doing a lot more of this than the US, and it's a real place I think Boulder can be another leader.
I think it's also a great opportunity to start the annual environmental advisory board.
The challenges. One other request, since it sounds like Andy didn't necessarily get the first email.
Yeah.
Do you have a timeline?
I
Like,
know I have the email, I just found it.
oh, okay, I was gonna say, if you can give us like a timeline, like if you haven't heard from me in 2 weeks, follow up. But oh, yeah, I can resend it. It sounds like we all got it. So.
Yeah, I got it, except I couldn't,
I'll
I
we can
was,
edit it.
I was able to open the PowerPoint, but not the document.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's this way. I do.
Okay, cool. So in that case, if we're feeling fulfilled on this topic. Yeah,
Yes.
we're good, great, then shall we move on to our final agenda item? Mr. Cohen.
I'm so sorry. Thank you, great conversation. Super helpful, and I guess as, just to wrap that one up there, if there's any data or any type of analysis that you all need, anything to kind of support this. And but you mentioned that Tim, you had a conversation with Tim,
Yeah.
after you all put that out, I also had a conversation with them, and he was very curious why the city doesn't regulate as part of its climate action plan. And it gets into a sticky kind of interesting space of social engineering when in many cases it's religious preference or otherwise. So for the city to tell people what they should and shouldn't need is a really tricky thing. But I think in this case, we're using taxpayer dollars, and it's a different situation. So I think it's really
I think the language surrounding it being the default
Yeah,
With the
as opposed to an
option.
requirement, yes.
is very good. I think
It
it's-
is. So, thank you. Yeah. Just a couple things that I wanted to flag for all of you. There's obviously a busy schedule coming up. The one thing that you may be wondering about is the Williams Village redevelopment project that's supposed to be coming back the way. We just checked in with the project lead. I think, I'm looking at Heather to remind me, they were going back to the applicant and things are moving a little bit slower than they anticipated. And so I think they were saying in Q4, it should be coming back. So know that that is still on the horizon to come to you. A few things that I would just flag, and I don't know how to get this one. I can get this one on the schedule if we want to move it forward, but there was a discussion, we just had it in Boston, about the project update on access management and parking strategies, so the AMPS. Mostly that's around code and policy, but it might be something that the board would be interested in hearing a little bit about after council gives its initial direction. This will be matters from the city manager coming up tomorrow. I was thinking that kind of starting to dip in a little bit into that parking infrastructure and parking policy might be a really good topic for the board to consider. So we can talk about that one. Big discussions coming up towards the end of the month, August 22nd, it'll be the next big discussion with council on the Boulder Valley Comp Plan update. So they did have a conversation just a couple of weeks ago, mostly on the mechanics of what a comp plan is, how council should be thinking about it. But the 22nd will be much more detailed on how we are actually developing an internal comp process to work with the county for that update. It's a really critical plan, really critical update to that 10-year land use plan. And if you recall from council's retreat, there is a lot of attention being paid to this update because we want to achieve a lot with it. And I would just assume that the board would have a lot of interest in being engaged in the comp plan updates. Also, on the fun side, on September 5th, we have our pollinator and little creature declaration. We do this each year. This is where we have council wear a little antenna and dress up in bee costumes, and they both love and hate it. I think most of them love it.
September 5th.
September 5th, that's the pollinator and little creature declaration.
And Jonathan, can I just add in there, there are some additional fun events being planned for that date, so we'll keep you posted on it.
Yes.
Where will it little creature?
It's at council, so it's a declaration that council does each year. This, I think, is the 10th year.
Sounds right.
I think this is the 10th year of doing this declaration. So we hand out little bee antenna and council will put them on, and it's actually a lot of fun. It's pretty whimsical, but really super fun. Moving into September, if there is an interest by the board to talk about the budget, obviously it feels like a little bit tangential, but a lot of discussion about alignment of the budget towards the SARE framework, how the budget is really supporting the overall citywide strategic plan and the different kind of environmental elements of that and the council priorities. We certainly can talk about that, give you an update on that. That is, I think, a bit of what's on the foreseeable future.
Thank you for the update. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 4th. And then, should we talk about October? Now that that's discussing rescheduling our October meeting in observance of Rosh Hashanah.
I mean, I think we should reschedule, given that it's a public forum.
Yeah.
Um,
Regardless of the
I'm okay with
Size of-
participation.
Yeah, so I assumed that the rescheduling of week would not conflict with other boards. So I think that seems like a pretty easy, pretty simple reschedule.
Push it out.
Yeah, push it out a week to October the 9th.
And then will you send, and then I will send out to
Yes.
So I could
You will
just,
send out an updated invite.
yes, I will.
For our October meeting.
I have a question. Can we as board members join from online or do we have to be present?
Yes, joining virtually is an option.
From any.
Yes.
I've attended a few meetings from Wyoming. It's something.
I also understand sometimes it's kind of like a last minute change, so I send that to link out an hour before.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, that's super useful.
Okay, so anything else anyone would like to bring? We still have like half an hour of time if we want to discuss things. If not, we can also end early. Right. In that case, motion to adjourn. All right, quick, all in favor? One absent, that passes. So thank you so much for your participation, everyone who was not here, to everyone in the future. That'll do it for tonight. Thank you so much.